Recording right now. Vicky, it's wonderful to connect with you.
It's good to connect with you. I love the picture behind. Tell me about the picture behind you with the shells.
I'm gonna save that for later. Okay. Uh,
Okay, sure, absolutely.
it's from Straits of Magellan, but we'll go there later. But here is actually an interesting question that I've been thinking about. Your email signature mentions the following words. Okay, dream, believe, laugh, achieve, inspire.
Yes.
The reason I'm asking this is, okay, I see these verbs and adjectives and several emails, several people have started using that. What does it mean to you? Like, what is your, like, how do you interpret that, and how should one interpret that?
So throughout my process, I've tried to figure out how do I share what I've learned through my open water swimming career with others. And one of the things I identified was that we each need to live by a set of rules that are our own
Mhm.
and are sort of our values, the things that we think are important. And so I spent some time thinking about it, and I came up with dream yourself to help others dream, believe in the possibilities, laugh at yourself, at others, have fun, achieve, use your skills to take the next step and be able to move forward, and inspire. Take what you've learned and provide it to other people so that they also can benefit from it. But the interesting part in all of that is when COVID hit and my husband became very ill. Um, I changed my motto, and it came to what I needed to do at that moment, and it became slow down, be patient, be kind. And that was for me to remind myself to slow down because I had a whole new world to live in, both because of John and because of COVID. Be patient with myself, with others, out in the world with John in our apartment, um, and be kind at every opportunity. It's so easy to get frustrated in difficult situations, especially when we're feeling stressed. And so I repeated that to myself multiple times a day, every single day throughout that whole journey. And then a year later, realized that I could go back to my original dream, believe, laugh, achieve, inspire, but keep the slow down, be patient, be kind, as something that was very close to me because it changed who I was as a person, made me a better person, and it helped me to do all sorts of things in a different and better way, including my coaching.
I'm sorry about John. Yeah, no, mm, yeah, we've all met John. Is a wonderful person. Yeah.
He truly was an incredible human being.
Mhm.
Every comment I received from others, whether it was work related or volunteer related or friend related, they all talked about what an honest, caring, value based human being he was. And I think that speaks the most to somebody when you can pass. And those are the things people come up with first. I think you've lived a really good life.
Awesome. Yeah. Vicky, you're from Manitoba.
I
You're living
am.
in
I was born in Winnipeg.
you live in Kingston now. What has that journey been like? Manitoba to
Wow.
King.
So I spent my first 5 years of my life in Winnipeg, Manitoba. We had a cottage at Victoria Beach on Lake Winnipeg. So my first steps in water, my first splash in water was in Lake Winnipeg. We moved to because my father was following a career, so we moved to Ottawa. I spent a number of years there, which is where I learned to swim at the Y there. Also discovered that I was horrible at most sports. I was not a coordinated young woman. I tried dance. I was kicked out of ballet by the time I was like 6 years old because of my lack of skill. Moved on to Pointe Claire, Quebec, where I went to high school, and around that time we also ended up moving to Kingston, and so I finished my high school there and started my swimming career in Kingston. Moved to Toronto as part of a bigger journey and trying to figure out who I was, where I needed to be. And then my husband and I found a place on Amherst Island, and we moved to Amherst Island, and he was getting ill towards the end of our time on Amherst Island, and we didn't identify it at the time, but he needed to move on somehow. And so we moved out into the Kingston area. And when he passed away, I thought, okay, now what? Where do I go now? What from now? And the first thing I realized was I needed to be back on Amherst Island because it was a place of peace, a place of healing, and a place of friendship, of just where I needed to be to take on my next steps.
Having seen your pictures of Amherst, at one point of time, I was thinking, hey, maybe I should move to Amherst Island.
It is a beautiful place. It's a migratory stopover for owls. The wildlife is everywhere. But when John was at his most ill, my mother would come to the apartment twice a day. And so I could do something specifically that was healing for me. One of them was coaching, because I was allowed to continue to coach my Paralympic athlete throughout the pandemic. But the second was photography. And I bought myself a camera and a telephoto lens. But then I discovered what I really needed was a macro lens. And I started to get closer and closer and closer into our natural world. And I could get lost in a plant with bugs on it for an hour. And that hour was incredibly healing. It wasn't dealing with the reality of John's illness. It wasn't dealing with COVID. It was a time where I was completely in a different world. And so I've held on to the photography as a really healing place to be, and sharing it because others appreciate what I'm doing. They speak of my opening up their eyes to different parts of the world they weren't aware of. And for me, that's a huge gift to be able to do that. So I don't want to squander that.
Awesome. Vicki, I know like pandemic has played a huge part in everybody's life. However, like talking about childhood, I'm from India. So I have about 4 or 5 friends, childhood friends that I hold close together, and we are still in touch. We still act like silly kids, but that's our connection. Yeah, everybody's very accomplished. Yeah, like a couple of them are like CEOs of companies. They've traveled all over the world, but that connection is still very spiritual, very strong. We get through life by connecting once a week.
Wow.
Like, do you have anything like that? Do you like what was your childhood like, and are you in touch with any of your childhood friends?
So my childhood, I think about my childhood as the time sort of elementary school, and we lived in Ottawa in a beautiful little community called Bell's Corners, and there was a group of us that hung around together, played together, got into shenanigans together, and it was a really wonderful, beautiful time. My parents did an incredible job always of finding us a community where we could live. But one of the things that challenges me is I have ADHD, and one of the things that happens is it's, you know how a 2-year-old, if you put something in front of them, it's there, and if you put a blanket in front of that thing ceases to exist. There's a similar thing in my brain that the second somebody isn't in my environment, they don't exist any longer. And so I wish I could say that I had retained those friendships over time because they were really valuable. And I think about those people on occasion and wonder where they are. But my ability to retain that they were there at that moment and that I can keep that going isn't part of my brain makeup. So I haven't been able to hold on to them. Now I'm thankful because I have my family. and I have my friends of today, and I have some wonderful friends. But that connection for over long term is a very difficult, challenging thing for me to do.
Okay.
No matter how important it is to me.
Okay. I'm going to jump into some painful things in your life. When I say painful, it's the physical pain.
Okay.
Why butterfly?
Because, well, I started out with butterfly because I read a record that I knew in my heart I could beat, and that was the 10 miles butterfly by the DiDonato twins. And what I learned during that swim was that they had surpassed that record, and I found that out about a mile from completion. And my brain, of course, went spinning and said, well, that's okay. At least it's a female world record. And I finished it, and it kept in my brain. And then I was told a number of times that butterfly was not an open water stroke, and it was impossible to use butterfly as an open water stroke, and it was impossible to swim the English Channel using the butterfly stroke. And my brain blows up when I hear the word impossible.
Okay.
It has from the very, very beginning. I can't be told you can't do something, because that is exactly what I will do. And that doesn't mean breaking a law. It means if somebody tells me that it's physically impossible for me to do something, or mentally impossible, I have a need to prove them that nothing is impossible. So when I was told the English Channel it was impossible to swim the English Channel butterfly because 2 men had attempted it, one had got 1 mile, the other had gotten 2. I think that was the DiDonato twins. My brain exploded, and it said, "There's nothing that is impossible. The human can do anything they choose to do." So I chose the major marathon challenges in the world as I perceived them, because we didn't have internet. This was 1980. The decisions were made in 1988, and so I chose the major marathon challenges that I perceived: the English Channel, the Catalina Channel, the Juan, Fuca, Lake Winnipeg, because I was born in Winnipeg, and then Lake Ontario. And part of the Lake Ontario was because the year before I had attempted 24 miles, or attempted to swim across Lake Ontario butterfly, and had made it 24 miles before I realized that I had to finish off freestyle if I wanted to finish the swim, because my body and brain were exhausted. So that was 1988, in the summer that I swam the 5 Great Lakes in 2 months. So my brain was exhausted by the time I got to Ontario, and I just couldn't fathom taking another stroke that way. But what I've learned in all of this is that every time I experience pain, it's mental pain. And my brain tells me that something hurts, or something is not working. And although that might be some level of true, when I manage the pain, it comes back to I can get through it because my brain can manage it. And over again, that's been proven true to me.
Wow. But did you swim as a child, Vicki? Like the part of like the age group racing?
I thought you had to be good to join. And my mother had presented it to me a couple of times, because my mother was a competitive swimmer when she was young. And she actually qualified and swam at the provincial level in swimming in Winnipeg. But when she was 16, she had 2 things she did. She was a ballet dancer who was offered a position in the Royal Winnipeg Ballet, and a provincial level swimmer. And her dad sort of said to her, it's time for you to settle down. Are you going to be a teacher or a nurse? And that seems so limiting. But at that time, at least it wasn't perceived that the only thing she could do is be a wife and a mother. She, at least he saw a little bit bigger and knew that she could do something bigger than that. But it was that restrictive vision, or non-restrictive vision, and sent her in that direction. So I thought I had to be good to join competitive swimming. So I didn't actually join until I was 15 or 16 years old, and I went to watch my younger brother, who's 10 years younger than me, swim with the Kingston Blue Marlins. And I was watching and cheering him on, and the coach came over and asked me if I would join the team. And I was totally flabbergasted. I'd never been asked to join a team in my life. I had been kicked out of more teams. And I was last picked for teams because everybody knew my lack of coordination. But the Kingston Blue Marlins had 7 senior girls. And if they had one more, they could have a B relay team.
Okay.
So I joined the team not knowing that, and swam for a year and loved it. Received a trophy for the most improved athlete of the year. And shortly after that, in a practice, I got a concussion, and I was off swimming for a little bit. And then I watched the Olympics and saw the speed of the arms of the athletes and realized that I was never going to be a competitive swimmer. My arms couldn't match that speed anyway. And it took me another 4 or 5 years to come up with the concept of open water swimming, because again, we didn't have internet. We had Guinness Book of World Records.
Like something that actually boggles my mind is, okay, to get into open water swimming, you need a bit of courage, and then to make a decision. And then to decide to swim across a body of water, you need more courage. And then on top of that, you decide to swim across a body of water using butterfly. I mean, how did you like physically, because with your background of swimming, like how did you get to that state? How did you get to the starting line? Okay, like, I mean, like, how
So
did you
I had been talking about doing an open water swim, and specifically beating the 10-mile butterfly record for about 5 years.
Okay.
And I didn't know how to start. I didn't know what the first step is. And I think that that's the biggest thing, is you need to know what is the first step to taking on something bigger than you could ever imagine. And so I kept talking about it, but not taking any action. And I was physically active. I was riding my bike everywhere. I was swimming a lot. I did a triathlon really poorly, but I did a triathlon, but I didn't know where to go. And somebody, I mentioned my goal of doing an open water swim to somebody again, and they turned and they looked at me and they said, "Vicki, shut up and do it." And I looked at them and I said, like, "What are you talking about?" He says, "I've heard this story so many times. It's time for you to get in the water, get busy, and do it." And I said, "Okay, I'll do it next summer." And he said, "No, I know you've been training. Get in the water, get busy, and do it." So I went out looking for a boat, because I needed a boat to do this, because I looked at the Guinness Book of World Records. I contacted them, found out what I needed, and I needed a boat and 2 people to watch. And that's what I perceived as all I needed. So I started asking people. I couldn't find anybody. Somebody said, "Talk to the media." I said, "Why would I talk to the media? Like, nobody's going to care about this. It's just me following a goal I want to do." And they said, "Talk to the media." So I reached out to the Kingston Whig Standard and told them what I was trying to do. And I talked to a couple of radio stations, and they put the story on right away. And one of my young swimmers called me and said, "I hear you need a boat." And I'm going, like, this is the last thing I need right now, is people calling in and just like talking to me when I need a boat. He says, "I have a boat." I go, "Oh." And so we had a little fishing boat, and he was willing to come along. And we had another person come along, and a third person. I don't like, and they were on this boat the next morning ready to go. And so I had the boat. That's all I needed to do a record, right? So so I got in the water. I started to swim, and immediately I'm facing challenges, right? So I'm swimming forever. My goggles are completely fogged up. And finally, one little dribble of water runs down my goggle, and I have one clean strip, and not straight, but it was there. So I sort of tip my head and look out it to see where I am. I haven't even passed the break wall that I was swimming along to start. And I thought, oh crap, this is so much longer than I ever imagined. And so I said, well, I better get going, because I'm not going to quit. And I put my face in the water and I kept on swimming, and I got to the turnaround point, swam back the whole shoreline of Kingston, turned around one more time. I didn't even know at this point if I was allowed to eat or drink. So 8 hours in, I hadn't had anything to drink, nothing to eat. And I'm thinking, I need something. So I treaded water and got a can of apple juice. They gave me a can of apple juice and a barley sugar candy. And I
Okay.
guzzled the apple juice, ate the barley sugar candy, and put my face back in the water and swam for another 4 hours until I was done the 12 miles butterfly.
How long did it? What was
It was 11 hours and 50 some minutes or something.
Okay.
I don't retain the numbers really well, but it was somewhere around there. And I got out of the water and I went to home, and I'd read one thing. I'd read was you need to grease up before you do a swim. So I had put Vaseline all over my body. I'm going like, how do I get this off? I hadn't needed it in the first place. And I'm going like, and so I've got like an SOS pad trying to scrub the Vaseline off my body. And an hour later, I went out with friends and we had a party at my favorite restaurant and sat and watched the news. And I was on. I'm going like, they actually cared that I was there. And so I went on and I did. The next step for me was a pool swim. It was 100 hours continuously. And I saw that as a good step because it was something I could do. And the record was 86 hours and 27 minutes or something like that by a woman named Myrtle Huddleston. But there was also a male world record. And I thought, maybe I should be reaching for that one. And I never got his world record. And his name was Zimmy. And he actually was a double leg amputee. And he had swum for a huge period of time. But my longest in pool ended up to be 129 hours and 45 minutes. Yeah, and then I heard it was impossible to swim a double crossing of Lake Ontario. And somebody sort of said, well, shouldn't you do a single crossing before you do a double crossing? And I'm going, no, because then I know what I'm in for. And I think it's hard to get into something when you know what you're in for. And so I went to do the trial swim, and I was introduced to Jack Ramsden. And I got in the water and I started to swim, and I swam continually. I stopped once during my trial swim to grab something quick to drink, and kept on going. And when I got out, he said, I didn't think this was possible, but if it is possible, you are the person that's going to do it. He said, you did two things I've never seen done before. And one is when people started, and the trial swim was done at Cherry Beach. He says people always head into the point of, so it's close to land first, and then out to a deeper, the wide open space. And you did the opposite. You headed out to a wide open space first. And the second was you're feeding. You could function without feeding. And he just believed that if it could be done, it was going to be me that did it.
Wow. Like these are like, you're a pioneer. Like I'm listening about the nutrition portion and then building your team.
Yes.
Like, how do you put together a team that could believe in you?
So right? I didn't choose people. I didn't choose people who had boat experience. Obviously I had the big boats and the captains and the navigators and the people that we needed. But my closer crew, I decided it was better to identify the people that had a similar personality and a perception of possibility, and teach them how to manage and drive a Zodiac, as opposed to the opposite. Now, there were no licenses for small boats right at that point, right? So anybody could get in the Zodiac and drive it. So we just made sure that they knew how to do it safely. And so it was just, I needed people who could connect and be inspired in the same moment. Because if I had people on the boat that were inspired by what I was doing, it would be a lot harder to give up in front of them. And even when I got to my final swim, the 80-kilometer butterfly, there were times where I didn't know how I was going to take the next stroke. I just had no clue. And my arms would be stuck there. And I'm going, like, I don't know how it's going to go around again. But when my swimmers, the athletes with physical disabilities and their families were out on the boats yelling, screaming, cheering, when people standing on shore, my color was red and they were waving red things, tablecloths, anything they could find was red. I realized that I could not quit in front of them. And if you think about even elementary school cross-country season, the kids are just exhausted until they get into the field where everybody's cheering, and all of a sudden they're fresh again. And so it was sort of putting these things in place so that I could continue to know that somebody cared. And that became what I needed, was to know that somebody cared I was out there beyond just swimming, but that there was an important purpose. So that's how I got into fundraising for open water swimming. And the butterfly summer, I actually, for the first half hour, and you can see them, I wore bracelets on my wrists, one for every child that I was swimming for. And they had made the bracelets and given them to me. And I tied them together so I could do it with one attachment. I swam with them close to me for that half hour, then put them in the kayak so that they could stay close to me.
Okay.
And then I had a list of every swimmer's name, and I would swim a half hour for each one of those swimmers. And when I thought I just couldn't take another stroke, I think, oh, this is Chad's half hour. He's not going to be impressed with me if I quit during his half hour.
Okay.
And half an hour later, my brain was somewhere else, because we're on a roller coaster the whole time. And all I needed to do was get myself through 20 minutes of misery, and I would be on the upswing and realize that I could keep on going. And so it was all those little mind games, and sometimes just turning off your brain completely, and sometimes being there and having a reason, a purpose. And those were some of the things that just kept me going in any situation.
Wow. Vicki Keith point. Like, tell me about it. Tell us about it, Vicki.
It was a point of land that I was told to go to at one point. So I did the double crossing of Lake Ontario, and the waves were so high. We had 3-meter swells with a chop on top, and Jack Ramsden didn't feel it was safe to start and swim through the channel. He wasn't sure that it was safe to come out through that channel. So he recommended I start at this point of land. And so I did, and then I finished at Queens Quay Terminal. So at the end of the double crossing. And another time it was recommended that I finish there because of the conditions. And it just became a place that was I guess a safety net for swimmers. If they got pushed beyond it, they would be adding many kilometers to the swim. So it was Jack that the first time, and I was actually a little frustrated at changing my plan at the last minute, but I had to follow the advice of the experts. And that's one thing I've learned over time, is always listen to the experts. You can then analyze, adjust, and choose your path, but always listen to the experts. And I've applied that to all sorts of experiences since then. But you can ask my parents. They knew that I didn't know how to temper my excitement in situations. And if I had made a decision, I was going to do it. And so over time, I sort of learned that. And so Jack was one of the people that taught me, listen to the experts, listen to what they have to say, and then adjust. And so it became Vicki Keith Point. I know when we had Carlos Costa, who was a double-leg amputee swimming across Lake Ontario, and we were heading for mainland, and he was getting pushed off course, and somebody said, "Well, what about Vicki Keith Point?" And we said, "Yeah, that is the best option." And we weren't going to finish at exactly the same place, because I wanted him to have his own spot, right? And not finish at Vicki Keith Point, but finish at his own spot. And so we were aiming a little bit lower down. I found out that there was young people with disabilities trying to get to that spot that he was going to be at. And so we adjusted again to be sure that there was a spot that the kids with disabilities had access to. And I remember him popping up his head going, "How far are we?" And I said, "It's right there. We're going there." He says, "That point of land looks closer." And I thought, crap, he can't go there. The kids can't get there. But I didn't want him to know the kids were there. And I said, "It's an optical illusion. That's where you want to go." And so we headed to that point. So when he got to land, there was his family and his friends and the young people from Variety Village all waiting for him and cheering him on. And I knew that was the experience that he needed to know the impact that he had made by doing that swim. So yeah, so it has just become a thing. And it's the plaque actually was removed by vandals. And so there's a rock hidden in the weeds without a plaque on it right now. And there's a group of people who have decided that it's time that is rectified and are working towards getting the plaque reinstated there. But if anybody, Vicki Keith Point is the headlands of the Leslie Street Spit, where the lighthouse stands, is called Vicki Keith Point. My brother likes to say, Vicki always has a point now.
You
Which is good. I
always
never thought that. Yeah.
Vicki, I know your parents were very involved in your swims.
Yes.
Tell me about the different roles that your mom and your dad played.
So my mom is somebody who never ever wants to be the center of attention. She wants to be in the background. And I'll never forget an interview. And they asked her, "Do you think she can do this?" And my mom wasn't even comfortable doing an interview, and she didn't know how to answer it because she didn't know if it was possible to do the double crossing, but she didn't want to say it was impossible because she knew me, and she said, "Well, she thinks she can do it." And originally I was a little offended by that because I wanted to say, of course she can do it. But what I realized was that was her way of putting that back on me and saying she believes she can do it. That means she's going to do it. And so my mom was very quiet in everything, but very important. As a registered nurse, she was a medical person there if we needed somebody on the boat. I knew that she was there if I needed something too, but that's not somewhere I would let my brain go. I don't need any help. I am fine. Funny story, after the double crossing, she presented me with a purple bathrobe that she and one of her good friends had stolen from the hospital. So it was a ratty old terry cloth bathrobe, and they had dyed it purple because my good luck color was purple, and embroidered a penguin on the lapel because I come up with purple penguin power, PP power, because you pee in the lake. And she presented that to me. So there's a picture of me wearing this purple bathrobe. But she also, for me, I was jealous of the kids who could wrap themselves in a towel and the towel would hang down to their feet and they'd be totally engulfed in towel. So she made this humongous towel. I called it the world's greatest towel. I still have it. And I wrapped my whole body in it and it dropped down to my feet. And so I was embraced with warmth. And after an open water swim, we know that's all we want is warmth. And then my dad was in the Air Force and he was a navigator. And he saw navigation in a different way because of his experience in air and knowing how an airplane is impacted by currents. And so was able to adjust his navigation to how a swimmer is impacted versus how a powerboat might be impacted or a sailboat, because each is impacted by the currents and the winds differently. Yep. And so we started out with a Loran C, which is way better than what Marilyn Bell started out with, a compass, right? So we had Loran C, and it wasn't exactly accurate, but it wasn't bad. And so he was able to keep me on course, and they would do readings every 15 minutes and adjust the course to keep me online. And then when GPS came in, that was an awesome thing. And so he would do a number of my swims, and most of my swims he was the navigator. But one of the funniest things with him, and something he still tells the story and is so proud of, is for the Great Lakes summer, the Week Standard was posting a map on a regular basis of the dates of my swims and where I was going to swim, which lake I would be in. And somebody from my dad's work cut out the map and pinned it up to the bulletin board, and above it wrote Brian Keith's vacation schedule. And he was so proud of that. So proud of that.
Do you have a picture of that, Vicki?
I have pictures of the newspaper, but I don't have a picture of his. We didn't carry phones, right? Like he'd have to take a camera to work. So, but I got to do a bit of bragging right now. My dad now just celebrated his 91st birthday, and he still works full time as an engineer.
Wow.
Yeah. So hardy stock, right? I mean, my mom's 88, and she's doing really well too. So, I mean, I've gained a lot of my my strength and my mindset from them.
So secret is genetics.
It's what? Genetics. Yes, I think it is. I think it is. Yeah. And there's other things that go with it, right? Because you can't just depend on genetics. You've got to do something yourself, right? And it's creating that mindset and being willing to put the work in. And there's so many little things that you can learn from your family, but you can also learn from friends or teach yourself. But it's not just about physically being able to do it. There's a lot of people that physically could have been the best athlete in the world, but didn't have the skills that to be able to follow through with that.
Yeah. I mean, you read my mind, so I was leading towards Great Lakes. What do they mean to you, and why did you how did that idea conceive? First of all, yeah.
So I had just finished the double crossing of Lake Ontario, and I was at a party with my friends, and they had gotten together and brainstormed the most ridiculous, impossible goal they could present to me. And alcohol may have been involved. And they came to me and they were laughing and they said, "We've come up with your next goal. We think you should swim across all 5 Great Lakes in one summer." And they started to laugh. They thought they'd come up with the most ridiculous, impossible goal. And I just thought about it. And I thought about it a lot that evening and overnight. And the next morning, I went out and I bought a map of the Great Lakes and I nailed it to my living room wall. And I took a magic marker and I drew a line across each one of the Great Lakes. And I stood back and I looked at it and I said, "I can do this." And then I'd take my favorite quotes and little pictures and the ribbon I won in skiing when I was young, and hung them up all the way around that map. And morning, night, and every time I walked past my living room, I'd stop and I'd look at the map and tell myself that I could do it. And I got into a habit. I was a lifeguard instructor at the time as well as a swim coach. I got in the habit of whenever I was sitting still, especially lifeguarding, I would be going over and over again, "I can do it, I can do it, I can do it." I'd put different tunes to it, but over and over and over again, I was outshining all the negative voices in my head, because we all have them, with one positive thought and a simple thought. And it was something that I actually resorted to many, many times during a swim. When my brain was yelling at me, I could out yell my brain with the positive words, "I can do it, I can do it." And that's what drew me through some of those times. So once I had the map on the wall and I'd been training, I'd done the double crossing, I chose the order. And so Lake Erie was first because it was the smallest and therefore would warm up the fastest. And it was only 20 kilometers. So I decided I'd do a double crossing of Lake Erie. Now I got across, turned around and got most of the way back. The winds were picking up. There was storms predicted. And my crew member suggested that I should be considering getting out of the water. I wasn't making progress because of the winds. And I said, "Are you telling me I have to get out, or are you telling me I should think about it?" They said, "We're telling you you should think about it." So I thought about it for an hour and realized that they were right, and got out of the water and was devastated. I felt like I had destroyed the whole summer by not finishing the double crossing. And then I realized that I'd done what I had to do. I had swum across Lake Erie. And so I shook my head and got my head adjusted and started preparing for Lake Huron. And a few weeks later, I was in Lake Huron, and that was a 48-hour swim. A week later, I was in Lake Michigan, and we started out with huge waves. I remember at one point, as we started out, a Zodiac was up in the air, and a camera and a cell phone, and cell phones were big and expensive back then, was in the lake. But we managed to finish that one. Lake Superior was calm, flat. I'd never had a flat swim in my life, but I went through a barrier about 2/3 of the way through the lake, and the water temperature dropped from 15, which I'd been swimming in, to about 10 degrees. And I'd actually been joking with a crew member at the time, because what feedings, I always had a laugh. And I was joking with the crew member, and I was laughing, and I put my face back in the water and hit the cold water. And I actually smiled for the rest of the swim because my face froze in that position. It was such a shock. And so, but I finished that one and then went on to Lake Ontario, and I did it 24 miles butterfly. I was planning on doing the whole thing butterfly, and it didn't work. So I finished. I did 24 miles butterfly, switched to freestyle, and finished that swim. And that summer, when I got out of Lake Ontario, we had raised just under $300,000 for programs for kids with disabilities. Within the week, we had gone over 300,000, which was the goal. And by the end of that year, we had raised over $548,000 for programs for kids with disabilities. And I always measured the success of my swims by that as much as by the completion of the swims. That had become very important to me. I'd met some of the kids at Variety Village, which is the charity that I was swimming for. And that just became really, really important. And part of everything I did, every time I swam, except for the first swim, I was raising money for a charity of some sort. The pool swims was Hospice Kingston, because my mother and 2 other nurses had started Hospice Kingston, and I wanted to be able to give back to that. And then when I started doing the bigger swims, I realized I needed a more national charity, and I was introduced to Variety Village, and that became my charity. And then the Kingston White Penguins after that, once I started that program.
I think that's where you raised over $1 million, right?
Yes. Oh, throughout all the swims, the fundraising total throughout the swims is over $1 million, and it's hard to put that at an exact number. But what somebody pointed out to me is, although I raised over $1 million, I also inspired other people to raise money. And so I think about some of my swimmers: Carlos Costa, Ashley Cowan, Terry Lynn Langdon, my husband John. All of them also raised money, and that was inspired by what I had sort of created as my value system within open water swimming. And I know that it's very much become a thing now in open water swimming, when you're setting out to do something that others perceive impossible for you, or impossible period, to tie a charity to it and make it something even more.
I have a silly question here, okay? Forgive me for asking this.
I love silly questions.
What's the most difficult thing that you've done, Vicki, in your entire life? Yeah.
Well, the most difficult would be caring for John as he was very ill. John was diagnosed with a slow dementia in December of 2019. It was upgraded to a fast, rapid decline dementia in January of that year. By March, we had to move out of our house and into an apartment, because we needed to ensure care was coming from a specific source, and he could no longer climb stairs at that point. We had stairs in the house. And by December of that year, December 12th, he had passed away. So going through that was definitely the most difficult thing I've ever done in my life. But facing other challenges, especially in my open water swimming career, gave me the skills and the strength to manage that well. And I think that whenever we're doing something like that challenges ourselves, it is really important that we identify what are the lessons we've learned or been taught during that process, and keeping them as part of who we are. I've known some people whose goal for their kids is that they never have to face challenges, and I think that's the exact opposite of what I would want to do. I want my kids to face balanced challenges when they're young, so when they face challenges as they get older, they're able to manage them, and they have some of the skills required. You'll never have all the skills required. I mean, I learned all sorts of things during John's illness. And my mom taught me some of them because she was a palliative care nurse. And so all along, I had learned things about palliative care and learning how to care for somebody, and letting them have the moments that they were lucid and able to have joy, and stopping at that moment and making sure that moment was celebrated. and then managing the rest as it came. So I think that in regard to difficulty, that was the most difficult. And if we're talking about open water swims, there's a few. I mean, I think about the Juan de Fuca, water temperature between 7 and 10 degrees Celsius, life expectancy an hour and a half. It took me 14 hours to finish the swim, and I don't remember the end. I actually walked up on shore and went to a press conference an hour later, and the media was asking me about the completion of the swim, and I didn't know if I'd actually completed it. But I figured I wouldn't be at a press conference unless I had completed it. So I talked about the completion of the swim without knowing I'd finished it. I didn't know until the next day when I saw it on the news and actually saw my strokes coming in that I had successfully crossed that. And I think about the 80, I call it 80 kilometers, but it was 80.2 kilometers butterfly. And just desperate to finish. It was 60, almost 64 hours in the water. And I was just desperate to finish. And I didn't know how I was going to finish, but I was desperate to finish. And my husband pointed to a rock. He said, swim there, touch that rock, and you're done. And I stopped and I tried to water. And whenever I swim butterfly, I always try to water backwards against the forward motion, because I always wanted to ensure that every stroke I took was butterfly. And so I started that in my butterfly summer, but I continued that. It was just a natural action. If you come up, you go backwards. So you're going against the forward flow. So I got up and I treaded water, and I said, how do you know? How do you know? And he said, you have to trust me. They've calculated if you touch that rock, that's over the 80 kilometers. And I said, okay. And I swam over, and the rock was right on the shore. And I came up and I put two hands on the rock and touched it with both hands, because we know two-hand touch in butterfly. And then walked up onto the shore and curled up in a ball and started to cry. And I was completely physically and mentally exhausted. And I have no clue where one more stroke would have come from. But I also know that if I needed to take one more stroke, it was there somewhere inside of me. And I think that is like the most important message we can get to ourselves, is no matter how far gone we are, we always have another step. We just have to find it. We have to keep on going. We don't question ourselves, just do it. And I remember John coming over and sort of grabbing me by the shoulders and walking me back to the Zodiac. And I curled up into the bow of the Zodiac in a ball and just started to cry. And they put a life jacket over me because everybody was exhausted. It's not just one person, like everybody who was living that experience with me. And every time I was in pain or I was exhausted, they were experiencing the same thing, but not aware of what I had left inside of me. So in some ways, they were in a more difficult situation than I was. And I was about halfway across the bay where the crowd was waiting. And I sort of popped my head up just to look around. And I was still hallucinating. And all I could see was walls, because that was my last hallucination before I touched. And I find every hallucination has a meaning. But right at that moment, I felt every time anything happened, there was another barrier put in front of me. And so I looked up and there was walls everywhere. And we were just powering through the walls to get to land so that I could be where the penguins were, where the people were, and talk to them. And talking about hallucinations, the other one was I was swimming over a treadmill. And every time I took a full stroke forward, the treadmill would move about an inch. And although I knew I was hallucinating and I knew it wasn't real, it was my reality. And it was how I was feeling. I felt like I was going nowhere. And I was perceiving that every time I took a stroke, I was moving 1 inch forward. And that's what it felt like. And I knew that wasn't reality, that I was moving faster than that. But it doesn't change when it's right there in front of your eyes. But I always had rules with hallucinations. So hallucinations start about 36 hours in of wakefulness, whether you're swimming, whether you're doing anything. It could start before or after. But I would get further and further into the hallucinations. And my pool swims is where I first experienced that. And so I learned how to manage them. I learned that I had control over the hallucinations, that I could make them positive if I needed to, and that I would never ever go down to check one out. So even when I saw a shipwreck with gold all spread all around, I knew not to go down, because what I knew even more than that is I'd given my crew members to permission that if I ever went down to check a hallucination, that they had my permission to pull me out of the water, and I would not hassle them about it at all, because that would say to me that I was too far gone if I went underneath to look at one. And so even when I saw it, I'm going like, what if it is true? What if it really is there? I knew that if I went under the surface, that they could pull me out. And that's what kept me sort of on the straight and narrow, so that I kept doing what I was doing and not get drawn that much further into a hallucination.
Like, how did your crew like figure out a way that, okay, you're going through this dark patch? Like, what was the... I promised them I would tell them. And so the first time I hallucinated at my feeding, I would tell them, I've started to hallucinate. It's really mild right now. And you've got a cat on your head. And so they sort of got it by little increments. And then after my, the crew that I had for the Great Lakes summer, after Lake Huron, I was hallucinating. And I sat up for half an hour after the swim and hallucinated for them. And they would ask me questions. Well, can you create an image of this? And the answer was, yes, there it is. And so I could. And so I had some level of control of it. And then if it got worse, or more involved, I would say, okay, now this is what I'm seeing now. It's a little more involved. I'm still good. And so it became a natural thing for them, because we talked about it and I didn't try and hide it. And I think the biggest thing is you don't try and hide something like that. You tell people about medical conditions that you're experiencing, which is the opposite I think they should do when they're swimming and they're feeling exhaustion or pain that isn't impactful to the body. And it's like, keep some of those things to yourself, because when you say it out loud, it becomes more real really carefully. And there's a fine line there, but a good coach will see the difference in a stroke if there's an injury versus somebody's experiencing pain. But if you start talking about emotional pain especially, it's going to get real really quickly, and you're more likely to get out of the water unsuccessful and be disappointed the second you do. So it's figure out the line of what to keep to yourself and what to share with others. Like, I would never ask how far I had gone after half the Great Lakes. I stopped asking how far I'd gone, and they were to tell me at the halfway point or beyond the halfway point, and then they could tell me again at 3/4, but I wouldn't ask. And that was because it messed with my brain, but also I got answers in statute miles, kilometers, and nautical miles. And those can mess with your brain too. And so I had one person assigned, and only that one person could tell me the distance I had traveled, so that I had some level of control over the information I was getting. You briefly touched on it, but how do you physically recover from a swim like this? And how do you mentally recover? No, there's a physical component and a mental component as well. Like, how do you do that, Vicki? Yeah. I
remember after the Great Lakes summer, being in a car and holding my arms and holding them up because my elbows hurt, but everything was aching. And I remember just holding them and supporting them so that they didn't hurt. And I remember going to bed and not being able to, the Great Lakes summer, not being able to get out of bed. And people would come and knock on the door, come in and get me moving. And then the butterfly summer, that was the most extreme event, or not the butterfly summer, the 80-kilometer butterfly was the most extreme event I'd ever done. And physically, the muscles recovered reasonably quickly. I remember though mentally, not being able to get my brain in gear. And I was a volunteer firefighter at the time. And I went to firefighter training the night after I finished the swim, because I knew that I'd be hassled if I didn't show up to training. And it was ropes and ladders. So I didn't climb any ladders. But if I closed my eyes for longer than a blink, I was immediately into REM activity. I was immediately dreaming. Like I was falling asleep if I closed my eyes for a blink.
Okay.
And that lasted for a number of days. If I closed my eyes longer than a blink, I was dreaming. And it took me, I think 3 months till I felt even close to my full physical, mental being. I remember we were training in the, a very hot space for firefighting 3 months in. And we had fire, we had our hoses, and the building was very hot, and it was all a safe training place. And we had our SCBAs on, but I had to leave the building because I wasn't functioning properly. And I realized that 3 months into it, I still wasn't 100%. And that was really eye-opening to me. And it was an extreme situation that it took for me to understand how much my body had gone through.
Mm-hmm. Wow. Nutrition. What's your nutrition like? I mean, yeah. I know we spoke about apple juice and sugar cane. Yeah.
We didn't have any information on nutrition. And so I actually talked to a nutritionist before my 100-hour swim. And there was no nutritional bars or anything. And they said, the best energy you're going to find right now is a Mars bar. So I contacted FM Foods and said, this is what I've been told. And so they gave me cases of Mars bars. Well, I was like 8 hours in when I realized this was not what. And then I spent the next 6 months giving Mars bars to everybody because I couldn't eat them all. And so that was my first experience with nutrition after the barley sugar candy. And so then when I started I started eating real food. So during that swim, they went to Arby's and got me a sandwich, and I asked for Baskin Robbins, and they brought me some ice cream, and I would tread water and eat it. And this was in a pool. All I had to do was be going back and forth, and all sorts of different things. And then as we move forward, the double crossing was hot chocolate, hot soups, arrowroot cookies, Tums, because acid reflux, and things like that. And at the turnaround point of the double crossing, all I was craving, and same with the 12-mile butterfly at the end, all I was craving was a hamburger. And at the turnaround point, somebody had a Big Mac for me. And so I was treading water, leaving the beach with this Big Mac still in my hand and munching on it while I swam back. The Great Lakes summer, I got more into identifying fruit, especially little cans of fruit was really, really helpful. We had been told to use styrofoam cups, but I didn't like the idea of them being left in the lake if somebody couldn't retrieve one. And so we started using a water bottle or something that I could reuse. And one of my fun challenges became, can I get the bottle back into the Zodiac after my feeding? And then it became, can I peg my crew member in the head with the, because you got to entertain yourself, right? And so again, it was mushroom soup, chicken noodle soup. But what I discovered was chicken noodle soup was also really good for a quick warm up. And so they'd bring me 2 soups and I'd dump one over my head because I wanted to be warm somehow. And so I just sort of built and learned. But I fed at the start of the swim every 2 hours. So I'd get 2 hours in before I had my first feeding. And for the first 24 hours minimum, I would feed every 2 hours. And then I would feel my body needed a little more food and I'd feed every hour and a half. And at some point I would move to every hour. But I think I moved to the hour, not because I nutritionally needed it, but because I needed more human contact. And that treading water and the bite to eat was the only time I had human contact. And there were times where I'd do a really quick feeding, but there were also times where I would do a 5-minute feeding. And it was because I needed conversation. I needed human contact. And so I would have a conversation with them and crack a joke. And then I would practice a limerick for my whole next hour and a half or hour or whatever. And I would share it with them when I stopped for my feeding, and then they would share one with me. And we had a dialogue going that continued while I was swimming. And so those sort of things is for me, a feeding was as much about a little bit of social contact as much as nutrition.
Yeah.
I tried chocolate because I'm a chocoholic, and all I tasted was wax. And so somebody had bought me this huge Lindor chocolate bar, and I tried it, and I couldn't eat it because it was wax. I said, put it somewhere safe. I want it afterwards. Well, sadly, afterwards, it was soaking in a bag of water because nobody took care of that, as is true with most of the food and things on an open water swim. Everything gets wet. So I couldn't even eat it afterwards.
So writing poetry while you're swimming.
Well, yeah. Well, I'm not sure we can call limericks poetry, but yeah.
Yeah.
They were never brilliant. They were never brilliant.
um, like, you haven't spoken about your training. Like, how did you train for these things? Yeah, like.
Again, this is before anybody was really thinking about what is training for open water swimming.
Exactly.
So I would train up to 8 hours a day. And often my day, at the peak of my training, I had a universal gym in my bedroom. And I would get up first thing in the morning, turn on the stones, and lift weights. No stretching, no warm up. I'd get up in the morning and lift weights to the stones. Usually Paint It Black was my lifting first song. And then wherever it went from there was fine. And then I would head down to the pool, and I would swim for 2 or 3 hours, get out, grab a bite to eat, get back in, and swim for another 3 or 4 hours. And it was all about power. And so what I tried to do was create the most powerful stroke with the least amount of energy. And so I keep my heart rate low and my power high. And my goal was never to be fast. So I would set my Timex watch to 30 seconds, and I would hit the wall on every 30 seconds. And that was my goal. And then I would pick it up and I would try and lap my watch and just pick it up a little bit, hit before the watch until I was lapping my watch and it was beeping on the 30 seconds faster, and play with things like that. But a lot of my training was power related to heart rate. And so my goal was keep the heart rate as low as I can, because I felt that if I was going that length of time, that I needed to keep my heart rate low. And so I tried, I think it was like 64 or 66 or something like that, trying to keep the heart rate there while I was swimming. Now, when I finished the one to Fuca, my heart rate was bouncing between 210 and 220.
Wow.
But that was hypothermia, right? But usually my heart rate was kept there, and it was all about power. But Jack Ramsden used to like to measure my condition by counting my strokes. And that frustrated me because I didn't want anybody in my head. And I didn't want anybody perceiving something that wasn't true and taking action when something wasn't true. So my crew would let me know when he was counting strokes, and I would spin my arms as fast as I could or go really, really slow power and just totally mess with him. And I mean, nowadays people would think that was disrespectful, because those are ways that we measure the wellness of our athlete. But that wasn't the understanding then. Yeah. It was I've got to keep on going to keep and I had to entertain myself any way possible. This is something that entertained me. And Jack figured out what was going on, of course, and it was all a big joke. But it was and then we're talking about training, and then I actually kept the logbook, and I was creating yearly training plans before it was a thing. And I measured the distance that I wanted to swim and increased it each week. So I hit my goal. My goal was to do it in 5 days. If I didn't hit my goal in 5 days, I had to swim 6 or 7. If I swam 7, it meant I got no break at all. I had to go directly into the next week. But if I was sick, I gave myself a break and started the next week fresh. And so these are all things I think we can learn as coaches as well, but especially the rest. And we're told all the time that rest is the most important part of our training, but we are not providing proper rest for ourselves, and we're not providing proper rest for our athletes as a rule. And even when we're giving our athletes a rest, we say, but you probably should be doing this while you're taking that rest. And I think it's really, really important that we understand that our physical body needs a break and our mental aspects need a break. And we have to be able to get away from what we're doing sometimes so that we are better. Even as a coach, I know if I take 2 weeks off or 3 weeks off, I've started to work again on new solutions, and my brain is coming up with better ideas because I've had to break away. So we know that we're better with the rest. And so I was providing that for myself.
Wow, way to go. Vicki, I believe you're also a doctor of law. Is it?
Yes, I call it my pretend doctorate. I have an honorary doctorate of laws,
Okay.
and that was given to me by Queen's University in Kingston, and it was in part because of my swimming career, but also because of my coaching style. And the kinesiology department at Queen's was doing studies on coaching styles, and what they were doing is they were miking us and then stepping back so they weren't visible, and we would sort of forget that we were mic'd and just carry on coaching. And they identified things in my coaching style that was really interesting to them. One was frustrating because they were coding our behaviors, and they found so few negative behaviors in my coaching style that I was skewing the whole bell curve. And and other things, they had to add a category to a coding system to use since the 1960s, and that was the use of positive humor. And so not sarcasm in a negative way, or not things that were sort of belittling and maybe funny, but really positive humor, and how it was impactful for my athletes. And so they ended up creating a study in part based on some of the things that I was doing as a coach. And obviously there was all sorts of other things that they were including in that, and their studies and their research. But they saw something very unique in my coaching style, and wanted to acknowledge the gift that of my style to their study, as well as what I was doing as a unique style of coaching. And I was calling it holistic coaching, but they called it transformational coaching. Okay. And a lot of studies have been done since then. And Jean Coté and Jennifer Turnage have really become world famous for their studies and their programs that they've designed on transformational coaching. So that's for me, that's really a gift, and to have the honorary doctorate to my name is an honor.
No, it's way to go. No, that's awesome.
Thank you.
As I said, you're a pioneer. Yeah. So, Vicki, who's your idol?
When I think about idols, I think about my mom reading to me three specific books when I was very young, and over and over and over again, she would read them. And the books, one was about Helen Keller, and it was a child's version of Helen Keller's story, but it touched me to the core. And another one was Florence Nightingale, the woman who invented nursing. And I love that story, and about her stepping into a world where she wasn't really welcome, and providing something that she intuitively understood the men needed to recover. And a third one was about a young girl, Marie Killian, I think her name was a young woman with cerebral palsy, and her family's challenge to help her live a life of a mainstream person. And those books framed my whole life, and told me, it sort of impacted me and reinforced in me what my values were, what I'd been taught by my parents, and what I thought I wanted, who I wanted to be when I was older.
Wow. What's a message for the young generation, Vicki? Swimmers, non-swimmers?
I think the hanging your map on the wall. I think if you have a goal, I call them ginormous, terrifying, mind-boggling goals. I don't think we need to set really realistic goals. And we're told all the time, your goals need to be realistic. Well, at some point they do. But I think if you have a ginormous, terrifying, mind-boggling goal, something that just scares the living bejeebers out of you, but you're really passionate about, I think that you need to take that goal and then break it down into smaller steps. So you take your goal and you put that on your wall. That's your map. That's where you're going. And then you can take some of the smaller goals that you're going to achieve to get there and hang them around that map. And some of your famous quotes, some of the pictures that symbolize to you success, and then break that goal down and go again and again and again until you have a realistic goal. And we're calling it them SMART, right? Specific, measurable, attainable, make sure that you can break it down to the point that you can create SMART goals. And then you start working there. And each step up, you're going to start finding the timeline that you couldn't find before, or whatever that is. Because if we choose our ginormous, terrifying, mind-boggling goal, and we can't put a timeline to it, some people put it aside because can't be a goal if we haven't put a timeline. The timeline is the least important thing in all of that. We need to know what we're working towards. And so we have that. And then we break the goal down until we can put a timeline on something and make sure that we have a way to measure it. You know, swimming across all 5 Great Lakes, that wasn't really measurable at that time. Yeah, there was 5 lakes, but that's not a specific enough. And yeah, it was in the summer, but what does that mean, right? You need to break it down into a year, into a month, into a week, into a day, into an hour, and sometimes, like in Lake Huron and Lake Ontario, 1 stroke. And I mean, it truly was 1 stroke, and then all you have to do is do 1 more, and breaking it down that small. But we have to be able to do that. And so I think that is the most important message. Just hang your map on the wall, break your goal down, celebrate the possibilities, and just keep pushing towards it.
Wow. Vicki, this was awesome. Thanks for your time.
Thank you so much.
We should catch up and get lunch one of these days.
Absolutely. Come to Amherst Island. You might want to move here.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to turn off the recording and then I'll talk about the picture behind me, okay? Yeah.
Yep.
Thanks again, Vicki.
No worries. That was good. My internet was good enough that you didn't lose me.
No, I don't think I've lost anything.
Awesome. You froze a couple of times is the only reason I'm asking. But the video doesn't matter. It's the